And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Well, thank you, Kelby, for that wonderful introduction, and I appreciate your being on this call to help us create a little different situation. We started this program with the idea that we were going to have Dr. Chuck Baldwin as our featured guest on this show, but Chuck got called away on another subject, and as it turned out, we actually end up with probably a better, even better show, because we have Bran Thornton on the call, and Bran actually is a Las Vegas resident, and Bran has really first-hand information on the events that happened at the Las Vegas shooting at the Mandalay Bay. And he is going to tell us a lot of things that you won't find on the mainstream media. And we're getting a perspective here from someone who represents a bit of a threat to the establishment. And Brand, I'd like to introduce you and have you give a little background on yourself, but we're familiar with you because you were on the call almost a year ago with Shauna Cox, and we were talking about the Lavoy Finicum assassination, and you provided a tremendous amount of insight into that event as well. So would you give us a little bit of an idea of some of the things that you've been involved in with between the Finicum, the Malheur, and the Bundy Ranch standoff?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in southern Nevada. My family goes back literally to 1905 here in Las Vegas. I have 5 generations directly here in Las Vegas. And a lot of connections, a lot of affiliations. My mother's in the Gaming Hall of Fame, is the longest woman in gaming. Now, my great uncle, Ernest May, was the first police officer killed in the line of duty in Las Vegas, Nevada. Well, he had married Mamie Bundy, who is Cliven Bundy's great aunt. Now, I did not know that, and it didn't come to my attention until sometime shortly after the Bundy Ranch standoff. I was talking to my mother about it. She goes, well, you are related to those people. And I said, no, I did not know that. And then, being a Mormon background, and how Mormons are, they're always doing all this genealogy, and she's on top of that. And she explained it to me, and that's when I found out I was related to Cliven. Well, I consider myself a patriot. It goes way, way back. I started looking into the Constitution of the United States and looking into the way our government has been mishandled some 40 years ago, at least 40 years ago. So I was paying close attention to what was going on there with Cliven Bundy and the Bundy Ranch. At the time that we, and I say we as Lieutenant Colonel Roy Potter and myself, now let me digress a little bit. I've known him for 35 years now, and it's kind of just an interesting coincidence how we made our connections. But at that particular time, when the BLM decided to start rounding up the cattle and abusing the Bundys, specifically Davy Bundy, it broke here in Las Vegas on the local news, and Roy was staying with me at the time. We were looking at some other things that we were doing, some videos, which you can go see on Roy Potter QA. But I got up one morning and he said, Brand, look at this. Look what they're doing to this Bundy guy. And I said, you know, Roy, I woke up thinking about that this morning. And being of Jewish descent, he said, well, there's our 2 witnesses. We got to go. So we grabbed a handful of things, and then we end up, I believe we stayed out there for 9 days. We got out there the day after they had abused Davy Bundy, beat him up, brought him here into Las Vegas. Could not get either the Henderson Police Department or the Metro Police Department to incarcerate him. They said he had broken no laws, committed no crimes, and he was released on the street. But we decided to stay through the duration of that thing. At the time, we didn't know how it was going to end, of course. But we were there all right on up until the cattle were released. I was 40 yards away from the BLM at the gate there. And it was pretty hair-raising. It was interesting. I consider it one of the great events in the history of this country now. And so that's pretty much all of that. There's a whole lot I could talk about that. You know, suffice to say that I was very much involved with that. I am a witness. I am on the witness list. I have been subpoenaed to testify on behalf of the Bundys in these upcoming trials. So where would you like me to take it from there?
Well, first of all, I want to also mention the fact that you were at Malheur, and you actually have inside information on that whole event as well. We won't get into that because you were on that on a previous program with us, and we can certainly ask our listeners to go to our archives. I believe it was December 8th. 2016, you were on our program with Shauna Cox, and that is in our archives. So if people are interested, please go to the archive site and listen to that program on December 8th. But the question that I would, and this is directly with Bundy's, but the question that I would have for you, Brand, is you were there, you saw what was going on. Did you see at any point in time the civilian population threatening any of the federal officers with firearms? And did you, on the inverse, see any of the federal officers in any way threaten the civilians that were at that standoff?
Well, absolutely. I've decided that anybody that works for the government in the capacity of Bureau of Land Management, Forestry Department, they are the most paranoid bunch of people probably on the face of the earth. That was a peaceful assembly. When we were headed down to the gate, all right, that was there just, well, we had already been told that the cattle were going to be released, and that's what we expected to see. That's what we wanted to see. And as we were headed that direction, the BLM and the Forestry Department, that mixture, they started threatening us on a loudspeaker that they were going to use lethal force, which was really stunning. It was stunning to everybody that was there. And then Shauna Cox, and I was not in the prayer circle. Let me make that perfectly clear. I was probably 100 yards away at that particular time. But, it was threatening enough that, that Shauna decided to, have a prayer circle then at that time. And as we got closer and closer, they stacked up in a military stance and were pointing firearms at us. Now, I wasn't even close to the, Stephen Stewart or Scott Drexler, those people, Ricky Loveland and Todd Engel and Eric Parker. They were up on the bridge or close to it. I had just pretty much walked by them and was heading down into the wash. And it wasn't until a lady come running. She was running around. She was running up on the bridge. She was screaming at everybody that she could find that they were going to announce, the BLM had announced that they were going to start shooting peaceful protesters. It wasn't until that time that handful of people, the ones that I just described, and a few others actually took a defensive posture. But even then, they never pointed firearms. They never did point firearms at anybody, let alone, the BLM or the Forestry Department or any of those people. But they did take up a defensive posture. Now, don't make the mistake. Nobody should make the mistake. That's, is purely defensive posture, and basically just being in a strategic position is all it was. Well, that, in my very strong opinion, is what prevented a bloodbath. I believe totally and completely from what I saw that the government wanted to initiate a shooting war. And had it not been for the fact that strategically there was people that had the high ground, that would have had the BLM and a crossfire and a concentrated fire, I believe very strongly that they would have started shooting at those peaceful protesters on the ground. So it was total aggression. The hair was up on my neck. I was amazed at what I was seeing, and I was in deep prayer by myself at that time. I was simply waiting I will have to say fearfully waiting for that first shot that I was absolutely convinced was about to come. And, I give all those men all the credit in the world, the ones that I mentioned and others, even Greg Burleson. I'm trying to think of another gentleman's name that was there, Mike McGuire. But I want to even say Greg Burleson. He was strategically located, and they could see him. And that's what stopped. That is what stopped the bloodbath that day. And wow. It would have been a horrible thing, and it would have been far worse than it turned out.
Well, Brand, one of the things that have come out of the trials and the so-called mistrials and now triple jeopardy with Parker and one other gentleman there is the firearms charges. And they've got these strong firearms charges against both the folks at the Bundy standoff and also at the Malheur game refuge standoff. And what they're using these firearms charges, and that, I guess, is going to directly lead into our discussion about the shootings in Las Vegas. The timing on this thing is almost way, way, way too convenient, and the location. Now, that's just my editorial comment, but the whole thing is really, the timing on this is amazing. Because the trial was literally ready to start within a day of when this event, or 2 days within when this event happened. And they did postpone the startup of the trial, but the timing on that was just amazing. And the other thing that I want to bring to this is that, we've seen these, this is a mass shooting, and we've seen this lone gunman theory before, and I think I'd welcome our listeners to do their own research on the Kennedy assassination, that same lone gunman theory, and we've seen this kind of thing before. And what we're trying to do with this radio broadcast, and thank you, Brand, for coming forward to be someone that can help with this, we aren't trying to get people to decide one way or the other. We're trying to provide the information and the evidence to get people to actually use their own brain and their own cognitive skills and take a look at this thing in further detail, because there's a lot more here than meets the eye. So, Bram, tell our listeners, first of all, I have to say, I know that you're right now in a safe house. You're in a remote location from your normal domicile. How did that come about?
Let me back up and just add to something else that you just said. There's no doubt that these courts, these federal courts, are working in concert with these events. There's just absolutely no doubt. It is beyond the pale that this could be by coincidence. As a court observer, I have watched Judge Gloria Navarro abuse the Constitution of the United States. She will not allow the First and Second Amendment rights to be brought in as part of the defense. And this is an end around, and I'm speaking specifically of the courts now, this is an end around to destroy our Second Amendment rights. Now, as you know, I've been a court observer all this time. I've been very vocal. I was at the Malheur Refuge. I've always been vocal. I've never gone and tried to hide. I've done numerous videos on what has been going on with the court systems, and as you know, specifically here in Clark County, Nevada, and the abuse that they have been fostering upon all these defendants. Now, I have been subpoenaed. I know I have another bombshell statement as a witness to give to the court. And the same thing I did at the Malheur Refuge, and I'll just digress a little bit there. And this is directly from Roger Root, one of the paralegals that was working on that case. After my testimony from the stand, Roger Root told me that, I mean, he did this with tears in his eyes. And anybody can ask him about this. He said, Brand, you just turned this whole thing around, this whole case around. And I expect to do the same thing in this upcoming trial. You know, Judge Gloria Navarro has threatened repeatedly the potential witnesses that were going to come forward, and has threatened them with incarceration, that they are unindicted co-conspirators and subject to arrest. And we had one gentleman in particular who was going to testify from the stand. And she threatened him, and he backed down, and he never did testify. Well, that's, I'll tell you right now, I'll tell God and everybody else and all your listeners, that is not going to happen with me. I will take that stand. And I think they know that. I think they know that. Going back to the Malheur, with the second trials, they had a, they had planned on arresting me. An indictment. They had an indictment for perjury and conspiracy prepared for me had I testified. If it weren't for a couple of the, one of the attorneys and one of the defendants, and of course a court-appointed attorney, which I did not even ask for. As soon as they sent him my way, I said, I'm not interested in even talking to you. You're a court-appointed attorney. I am here to testify. He went and talked to one of the defendant's attorneys, and then all three of them came in. And the first two to talk to me, of course, were the attorneys. And I told him right in front of the defendant, I said, you know, you're just another court-appointed attorney. I'm not interested in hearing what you have to say. I'm here to testify. It wasn't until one of the defendants, and I'm not going to mention his name because I'm still a little bit leery about that, but he said, Brand, no. And he just sat there and shook his head at me. And I knew that he knew something I didn't know at that time. Well, to his eternal credit, he saved me from being arrested, and I'd still be in prison to this day until my day in court came up. So that's for 2 hours they had been in the courtroom with the judge arguing whether I was going to be allowed to testify or not, and they came to an agreement that if I did not testify in person, then I would not be arrested, but they used my previous testimony, which was really amazing. I was in the courtroom when it was read. They tried to find somebody that actually looked like me, as an older guy with gray hair. And the judge announced to the courtroom that Mr. Thornton was not available and that this person would be reading his previous testimony. Well, it was kind of interesting as people in the courtroom turned around and looked at me and said, "You're not here?" So it was a little bit interesting. So anyhow, fast forward to what's coming up now. They know that I will testify. So I had a very interesting thing that happened a couple days before the shooting. I'm driving down the road, specifically Charleston between 28th and Lamb Street. I'm in the far left lane. Okay, so there's 2 lanes there, plus on all the way to the right you have a turning lane. And here comes an SUV shooting out of a parking lot there, heading directly for me. There's no way it couldn't have seen me, could not have seen me. At that particular time, I was the only vehicle that was even going down the road at that time. Now, there's a lot of oncoming traffic. They shoot across 3 lanes of traffic and try to T-bone me. At the last second, I took some evasive maneuvers. Otherwise, I would have just got plowed into. They knocked me into the medium. I think they were trying to knock me into the oncoming traffic because there was a lot of vehicles coming in the oncoming traffic about 45 miles an hour. And I think that's what they were trying to do. After he hit me, rather than immediately take off, driving off, he went into the other, which would be the westbound traffic now. I was eastbound, and he stopped. I pulled in behind him about 50 feet, and I was very suspicious. The windows are completely blacked out. I can't see anybody in there. It is a very late model vehicle. So I'm sure they're insured. I'm thinking to myself, they've got to be insured. But nevertheless, I am very suspicious. I can't see anybody. Well, what the heck was that? Got alarm in this place. Oh, this is crazy. Hang on. Uh-oh. Yeah, I know. It's saying there's a fire alarm going off this place. I have no fire.
Oh. Okay.
Anyhow, it quit. Thank goodness.
Okay. Go ahead and keep going, Brad, because this is an interesting story.
So anyhow, I'm sitting there about 50 feet behind them waiting, and they're not getting out. And they're not getting out. And they're not getting out. And then I'm like, okay, this is just way too suspicious. It's gone beyond the pale now. So I stick my hand out the window with my phone, letting know that I have a phone, a camera phone, and that I am calling the police. That's what I'm hoping that they will realize. As soon as they see that, they drive off on a high rate of speed. They're gone. So the police show up, and I tell them the story, of course, and they do a report. And I got damage to my knee, so the ambulance takes me away. I go to the hospital. The officer, that was there, that took the report. He comes in and sees me, and he says, "Hey, there'll be no problem finding this guy." We actually got video of the whole thing. There was a camera there that videoed the whole entire thing. So we got their plate, license plate, everything. That's over 3 weeks now. Every time I call, they have nothing to say to me except they have put detectives on the case. That's where we now stand. And it just got to the point I had been literally chased by one of these vehicles here a month or so ago into the previous complex I was living at. And I was able to lock eyes with that person. They came at me at a high speed behind me. And here goes that crazy alarm. I do not know what's going on. Hopefully it'll quit. So they basically, I was able to lose them before I got in the complex. I know I've been followed repeatedly. And finally got to the point, and there's a lot of wonderful people out there. God bless them. I've had at least a half a dozen people who have messaged me, come and stay with them, all as far away as Kentucky, as far as Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Utah, Wyoming. And that's how wonderful people are. Mm-hmm. I have told them I'm going nowhere. I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to testify for my brothers in prison. So that's pretty much where we are at now. I'm a little bit nervous about this fire.
Yeah, I am too. Are you? Would you tell our listeners, though, you are right now in a, let's say, a safe house or a different position than your normal residence?
Yeah. There's some people that came forward, and hasn't been a dime out of my pocket. God bless them. They showed up, said, we got a place for you. They showed up with half a dozen people, said, we're getting you out of here. They did 99% of the moving, and, and they got me out of there, and I'm in a different place. They moved me in last night. So
Good. Well, that's important. Okay, now we're going to get down to the meat of the mass shootings in Las Vegas. And, my descriptor, my title for the radio show for this week is the Las Vegas mass shootings, crazed lone gunman or a man's cover-up. You decide. And I want you to provide all the information you possibly can to help us to flesh out what really happened in Las Vegas during that mass shooting. And I know for a fact that you are very well connected with people in the gaming industry, people in the law enforcement and security personnel and so forth. And I'd just like you to give us an idea of some of the people that you've talked to. I also know that you had conversations with people that were actually in the crowd who are close family members and things like that. I'd like you to give our audience as much information as you possibly can. Okay.
Well, the morning of the shooting, now I had not realized that that night that this thing had even taken place. I usually go to bed pretty early and I sleep pretty sound. But the morning of the shooting, I was supposed to have an evaluation on this knee from the vehicle accident, which I just told you about. And my phone goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's the doctor's office canceling. Second alarm goes off. So I'm like, okay, well, that's unusual. Why are you canceling? And they had nothing to say to me. The receptionist had not. She goes, we're just canceling. We'll get back with you as soon as possible. So that set off alarm. I was like, something's not right. So I immediately went to the news, and boy, there it was. So that was the earliest that I had learned about it. I immediately got on the phone, started making some calls. The people that I know, just to make sure everybody was safe that is closely related or associated with me. I have a son that was working that night, and it turns out he is the hotel casino he's working at also got hit. I could not get a hold of him initially. I texted him, sent messages to him. I finally got a hold of his daughter, which is my granddaughter, and she said, Dad's okay. So I just then I have a brother that I knew was up there. I got a hold of him. He had left. He had actually not even gone to the concert. So that's what I was involved in doing. And then all of a sudden I get this message that my nephew, William King, had been shot. All right. So now it's a little hard. It was a little hard for me to find anything out at that time. Obviously, there's chaos. He had been taken to a hospital. I was trying to find out which hospital he was in. His mother is my sister. My sister Susan. And so I'm waiting for calls. I'm trying to call. I'm trying to get a hold of people. And gosh, what's it going on? So that's where it kind of ended at that time. I had to take some time to find out what was going on. I got a hold of another nephew whose wife was working, and I did not know that, of course, at the time. Her name is Noemi. She was working that concert. She worked for Mandalay Bay as a bartender. She was working the outdoor bars, I found out. So I got a hold of Raymond, and that's when I learned a little bit more. He said he is in stable condition at that time, I found out he had been shot through the chest, which was amazing to me. I'm like, how can you be in stable condition? You just got shot in the chest. So this information started coming into me in bits and pieces. So once I found out he was in the hospital, I found out he was stable. I got his wife. I call her his wife. Her name's Kimberly. They're actually not technically married, but that means nothing to me. She took some pictures. She put them out where I could see them. There's a picture of William sitting up with a gaping hole in his chest. That is the exit wound. Man, I don't know what's going on here. It's driving me nuts. That was the exit wound. And so I'm going to go into another room here where hopefully I can't shut this thing off, but at least I can go into another room where it's going to be quieter if it keeps going on.
Okay,
so,
sure. No problem.
So I decided to, give him a couple of days, and because I know that his family, his mother, and his dad was going to be there with him, and I know that there was going to be a limited amount of people they were going to even let in there, so there's all kinds of other people that were going to go in there and see him. I decided to give him a couple of days and then give him a call directly and find out if I could come over and see him, which happened. So I called him up. I said, hey, William, are you taking visitors? If you don't mind, I'd love to come over and see you. And he said, come on over, Uncle Brand. So it gave me an opportunity. I spent probably at that time a good hour with him, and I listened to his story. His wife was there, Kimberly. She told me her story, and I was dumbfounded. Well, as I'm talking to him on the phone, he gave me a detailed account before I even get over there. And he tells me that they were running east. They were facing east when people were dropping all around them. So he grabbed his wife, he threw her down, and put his body over her body. And but it got worse. It got to the point that, he says, okay, we just got to get the hell out of here, as far away from this place as possible, because it's just getting worse. Nothing's getting better. People are continuing to get shot. So they had initially were headed for gate, I believe it was gate 5 and gate 7. That's where the direction most of the people were going, and it was Kimberly's. For whatever reason, she says she doesn't even know why. She said, let's don't go that direction. Let's go a different direction. So they were further south in that concert area, and they were running east. Okay, now I'm back up to where I was earlier. He's on top of her. She's basically face up. And he said, we just got to get out of here. As soon as he starts to rise up, he takes a bullet in his left lower back. This is an amazing thing. It goes just above his kidney, just below his rib cage. It travels between his rib cage and his lung, barely missing his aorta by 2 centimeters, and exits his upper chest. Now, that is absolutely a 1 in a million shot. But here's the issue. Here's the problem with that bullet coming from Mandalay Bay. It's impossible. He's facing east. He's at basically a 30-degree angle, okay? That angle is opposite to the angle that would have been coming from the 32nd floor. And I hope your listeners can get it in their mind what I'm trying to say. Now, if you reverse his angle, in other words, if he's facing,
it would have been.
Yeah, that would have been different, but then that would have been an entrance wound into his chest. Right. All right. So none of this. So now I arrive at his house. The first thing I want to see is I got to see with my own 2 eyes. I've absolutely got to see with my own 2 eyes these entrance and exit wounds. He meets me out front. I see the exit wound. He's got a big bandage over it, of course. I turn him. I grab him by the arm. I grab him by the first thing I did is I turned him around. I said, William, I got to see where you're hit, because I did not know at that time. As soon as I saw where he's hit, I looked at him. I said, William, you did not get shot from Mandalay Bay. He says, I know, Uncle Brand. He said, this has been driving me crazy. I'm trying to figure out how in the world did I get shot from the hotel. Hang on, I got somebody outside hollering at me. Give me just a second. Yeah?
Okay.
Oh, you need to check it? Okay, come on in. Okay, there's some fire people here, so sorry about that.
No, that's no problem. I hope they really are fire people.
Yeah. Well, I'm locking my door into this room I just walked into. So anyhow, that was the biggest eye-opener at that time. I was like, there's no way, absolutely no way. Now, I worked out the angles and all that kind of stuff to just reaffirm what I just said, and I'm not going to bore your listeners with that. So we go in, I get to meet, we go in, there's Kimberly, and then eventually another major media outlet shows up, but we'll talk about them later. So Kimberly starts to tell me, she's really vocal on all this. At that particular time, William's still in shock. He can barely raise his left arm. He's not very talkative. It hurts to breathe. He's got all this internal bruising that took place. Mm-hmm. So she's doing most of the talking. She tells me a story that it just reaffirms everything that I just realized, that he had not been shot from the hotel, Mandalay Bay. Okay, she's going into a lot of detail. She tells me how as soon as he gets up, he gets hit. There's a blood spray that comes out of his chest. It sprays her face with his blood. He throws his hand over his chest and says, "We just got to get out of here." She says, they jump up. They're running with a few other people. She says there's a young lady that's just to her immediate left, a couple of feet away. She said, at the instant I turn and look at her, she takes a round directly in the face, and she is killed instantly. They stop for a second. William wants to help her. He's going to grab her to lift her up and see if he can get her moving. And Kimberly says, no, she's dead. There's nothing you can do. And I guess it seemed like a slight little debate took place there, if you can imagine that. And she kept saying, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead. We got to go.
And she was
Kimberly,
facing which direction? Brand, she was facing which direction?
East. She was facing east, and she was facing Reno Street. Anybody who wants to Google Sky it, look at Reno Street. You can see where the concert is. They're both facing, everybody's going east now in that little group to get away. So I said, okay, Kimberly, you saw her shot in the face. She goes, yes. I said, did the bullet exit out the back of her head? She goes, no. She's face down. There's no blood on the back of her head. She goes, she's a blonde. She goes, I would have seen it. So now we have 2 eyewitness accounts and 2 victims that were shot facing east, going east. So there is obviously a shooter that was east of the concert area, okay? And there's a lot of analysis that has taken place. There's a forensic acoustical analysis that was done by, I believe it was, I forget this guy's name, but he's the health ranger. Anyhow, he did an excellent job.
Ty Bollinger, or not Ty, oh, come on. Anyway, let's go ahead and keep talking. I'll think of it.
Yeah, so he did an excellent job, and he nails it. He said he nails it where a shooter would have been east of that concert area. So that is huge to me at this time. Now, the following, I believe it was the following Sunday, there was a benefit concert that was it's called Stoney's Country Music, I believe is the name of it, here in Vegas. And we know those people. I know Scotty. He's the lead entertainer there that was performing that night. I know his wife, Lisa. They're very closely associated with our family through the years. In fact, Scotty played the guitar at one of my sister's funerals. He's a tremendous talent, and he was involved in this concert to help raise some money for William. So I go there. Then my other nephew, Raymond, his wife, Naomi, was there. Now, I did not know up until that night that she had been working that concert area as a bartender. So finally, I'm sitting there, and I was like, holy cow. I said, Naomi, do you mind if we just go out and do a quick interview, and I did a live stream that anybody can go and listen to. So she tells me this story that is unbelievable. She was working an area that came under heavy, we'll say artillery, all right? She was there with like a dozen other coworkers at that particular time, and, so she has their story also, plus her story that she is telling me. And it was utter and total chaos. It was insane. The bullet rounds that were penetrating the area that she was working, they tried hiding in the way she described it's just, it sounds like just a little metal type thing that you can put a few people in there, but it's where they basically keep some of their supplies. The bullets were literally going through that. She said the EMT tent next to them, when you have these big concerts, they'll have an area set up with a big tent in case anybody gets hurt, drinks too much, or whatever. Those people fled out there. It's getting riddled with bullets. So, and she tells me the same story. There are people dropping left and right all around them, total chaos. People are hysterical. They start running towards those particular gates, Gate 7 and Gate 5, they're locked. Now, she tells me up until that night, they were always open. But this night, they are locked. Okay? So there's a mass of people that pushes up against them. There's these it's like a cyclone fence with some sort of a green cover that covers it up. And they just keep pushing till the whole thing folds over. And then there's razor wire that got to get past. She's telling me how a lot of the people got terribly cut by the razor wire. And once they start taking off, they just continue to run. She describes how there's shots everywhere. And this is something I want to repeat. Kimberly, William, Noemi all said this. All three of them say the same thing. There was shooters everywhere. William told me, he says, I swear to God, Uncle Bran, there were shooters everywhere. And they described how the mass of people start going one direction, and then they start getting shot from that direction. They turn around to run to another direction, start getting shot from that direction. So they just all try to find a place to hide, lay down, because they feel very strongly that whatever direction they run, they're getting shot at from that particular direction. Mm-hmm. So now, since that time, I've tried to make heads or tails of this. We know there's multiple shooters. We know, and there's a campaign of disinformation that's going on that is unbelievable at this time, calling it a false flag, that nobody actually got shot. This is coming from pretty much all. I mean, these trolls are everywhere. There's Paul Craig Roberts even picked up one of his personal acquaintances or whatever is a military medic, has said the same thing. Nobody got shot. That is ridiculous. Now, having said that, I saw another video that was put out very recently that is fake as hell, that evidently did take place that night. So what I have come up with and others have come up with is that during this FEMA drill, which was taking place, okay, there was one that's taking place September 30th, they had to advertise for it. And they have thrown this into the mix to the point that there are a lot of people, a lot of organizations that do not believe that anybody got shot, killed, or hurt. Now, I put out a lot of pictures of showing blood everywhere, mm-hmm. but I don't know. It just doesn't seem to get out there properly or click. I put a bunch of pictures of William out there in the hospital. There was a vehicle that a gentleman had stolen just for the purpose of transporting these victims. Now, I have seen pictures of that vehicle. I put those pictures out. There's blood all over it. The back seat is full of blood. The bed of the truck is full of blood. The sides of the truck are full of blood. So I hope people will continue to investigate and research this. They got to understand that this did actually take place, that there was an attack.
Right.
And it's not that hard. If they just call the hospitals, between UMC and between Sunrise, there's something like 400 of the victims were taken. Those are our two largest hospitals in the valley. All I got to do is call them. All right. Now, maybe they've kind of clammed up since then. I don't know. But people were looking for their loved ones, were calling, and they were actually talking to the hospital personnel who were acknowledging all the things that I'm telling you now. So the way I look at it, this is just another fingerprint of the government being involved in a false flag. And like you said, it's right on the heels of these trials that are getting ready to take place. We have been beating the crap out of the government in these trials. Not as good as I would like, going all the way back to Oregon. However,
considering it's a rigged jury, with the judge being the one that's calling all the shots and making sure that none of the Constitution or anything like that is involved, and threatening witnesses and everything else, it's a wonder that we have this many good citizens who are willing to stand up and say, no, they weren't guilty.
Yeah. Well, the government in the past has enjoyed a 98% conviction rate. I don't know where they're at now, but it's probably less than 20%. They have a dollar incentive for every conviction. These judges do, the prosecution does, and they have not been able to collect that money. So this comes on the heels, right on the heels of this upcoming trials. There's no doubt in my mind, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that this whole thing was staged, was planned out well in advance for this very purpose, is to poison the jury pool on these upcoming trials. I am absolutely 100% convinced of that.
Well, Bram, just so that we make sure our listeners really understand, I'm going to read part of the police dispatch report here. And, it says, I see shots coming from the Mandalay Bay halfway up. We have an active shooter inside the fairgrounds. Shots are coming from Gate 7. Shots are coming from Gate 7. It's coming from like the 50th or 60th floor. I see local flashes in the middle of the Mandalay Bay on the north side on the west tower, but towards the center of the casino. I'm inside the Mandalay Bay on the 31st floor. I can hear the automatic fire coming from one floor ahead, one floor above us. Now, how they could figure out that was one floor above them, that's interesting. But in any case, there are literally every kind of police report on here saying 15th floor, 50th floor, Gate 7, inside the fairgrounds. It's obvious that there is no continuity in these police reports. I know that you're connected with some of the folks that are in the gaming industry and in probably in the Mandalay Bay. Have you had any contact with any of the security people or the police that can help maybe to flesh this out a little bit?
Well, that is one of the big issues. The FBI has put a kibosh, has basically threatened these people. The people that I have talked to have said that they say things like, this is an ongoing investigation. If you start talking about it, we'll get you for obstruction of justice. And they're petrified to talking. Now, I did get some phone calls. One of the things they said on these people that work security said, please, whatever you do, do not mention my name. But we need to get this out. We need to get this message out. And so I have become a spokesman, more or less, for them. And this is what I was told. And these are extremely reliable sources, as good a source as you could possibly want. this is what I was told. The FBI took over the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay. They took over all of the videos, the cameras, the monitoring a week before the shooting took place. Now, that's a slam dunk in my mind. I was already suspicious. I was already very suspicious. But when I heard that, I said, it's a done deal. The FBI is up to their eyeballs in this whole thing. And my feelings are very strongly that this is just another Fast and Furious gun running. Mr. Paddock, he may have been a patsy from the beginning, working for the FBI. I mean, they will eat their own. They don't care. Okay, as long as they get their agenda and can push their narrative. So I hope that people people need to understand that we are under attack. Not just Las Vegas, but this whole country is under attack. Mm-hmm. They're just picking and choosing certain places to hit at this particular time to get their agenda going by forcing their narrative down everybody's throat. And this is just going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. I saw where Julian Assange just put out that virtually every false flag has been done by the FBI. Well, here we go again. The FBI is an absolute criminal organization. They have murdered. They continue to murder, and they will. They're not going to stop unless the American people say enough is enough. And so that's why it's so important to get all the details of this out. Now, if you look at what just happened yesterday, I'm still in shock that Campos finally surfaces. And where does he surface? On Ellen DeGeneres' show? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? This plays right into the FBI's hands. They have so muddied the waters. They have destroyed this investigation. It will never go anywhere from this point on. This was by design. And, anybody that watches that and watches Mr. Camp, I'm not even sure it's the same guy looking at the pictures. But if you look at his body language, I see fakery all over it from top to bottom, that whole thing. And then all of a sudden, Ellen DeGeneres is a forensic expert, and she's actually leading him, giving him leading questions and answers, and basically talking for him. I mean, the whole thing is I call it officially a three-ring circus now at this point. And I think the FBI got what they want. You're never going to get to the bottom of this. At least Sheriff Lombardo will never get to the bottom of this if he ever wanted to in the first place. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things, Brand, too, and I've read this in several sources, Campos was not even a registered or a licensed security guard, which, if in fact he really was a security guard, it was required in Las Vegas because that's a very union town, and you've got to be a member of a professional organization. Am I wrong on that? But that's come up numerous times.
No, you're right, and it's very closely regulated. Now, he was not able to carry a firearm. That's a different level from So, but nevertheless, it's the gaming industry handles billions and billions of dollars on a regular basis. All right. And there's more than a few people out there trying to figure out how to get that money. We have some interesting things that takes place here from time to time. A few years ago, a guy came running through, grabbed as many chips as he could grab, which was really stupid. How are you going to use the chips? And jumped on his motorcycle and took off. And they eventually caught him. So this just is kind of the mindset. A lot of people, when they see this kind of money just right in front of them on the tables, things like that. So it's very closely regulated, very closely monitored, and security is a huge part of that. A huge part of it. They just don't take people off the streets and plug them in. All right? They got, like you say, they got to be licensed, they got to be certified, and this gentleman wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing, Brand, and I have to bring this up, and I'm going to get Bob Barnett in this conversation because he's a former infantry officer, and talking about the number of rounds and how much carnage there was for a lone gunman theory. But I want to mention what you just started to talk about, and I want you to flesh this out. As far as I can tell, isn't Las Vegas one of the most highly monitored and have more cameras and more video files available for verification because of the gambling and all the other things? Isn't this almost absurd to think that they don't have a lot of video information on all these things, and somehow they can't provide the evidence?
Any place there's gaming, there are cameras everywhere. Here, a few years ago, I had gotten off of work and I had a work knife, and it was, you could barely see it. It's in my pocket, right? But it latches on the outside of the pocket. It doesn't just go all the way to the bottom of your pocket. I use it as a duck knife. In air conditioning, I cut ductwork with it. So I got off work. I decided to play a little bit of blackjack. I'm sitting there at the blackjack table. Next thing I know, I got two security officers behind me, and they know me. They know me by name. It was one of those mom and pop casinos. It's off the strip. And the security gentleman says to me, he said, "Mr. Thornton, would you please take your knife and put it in your truck, and you can come back and play?" And I was in shock because you could barely see it. They were able to see that with their cameras. Now, imagine that. So these cameras are so sophisticated, they're everywhere. They're everywhere through the casino. Here a number of years ago, I hit a fairly large jackpot playing on one of their machines. And, it took a while. It took probably 2 hours to get paid off. And I was talking to one of the casino workers, and I said, "Why does it take so long?" And she told me, she goes, "They go all the way back to the moment you drove into that parking lot." They backtrack. What they do is they'll backtrack from the time you hit that jackpot, and they go all the way back to the time you entered into the casino, even to the time that you pulled in the parking lot with your vehicle. They watch that whole series. They fast forward it, but they'll watch the whole thing, everything that you did. Now, I was there to watch the college football championship between Auburn and Florida. So that shows you how long ago it was, like 3 years ago or something like that. And so I was there for the whole football game. And then as I'm walking out, I decided to play this progressive machine, which I hit the jackpot. That just goes to show the level of precision and monitoring that these casinos have. Now, here the Mandalay Bay comes out, and they don't have any of this camera footage or videos of that 32nd floor for all that time. That is absolutely a lie. That is an absolute falsehood.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, especially since they said that he hauled 28 weapons into the room. How in the world could you haul that much stuff up there and nobody notice it? I wouldn't care if it was 20-some broomsticks. Somebody would notice it. Absolutely.
It would be all over the camera footage at the very least. So it's just, it just tells me the level of conspiracy that this is, and this is not a theory, of course. And the different agencies, I believe, that were involved with it, mainly the FBI, I'm absolutely convinced was involved with it. They're working in concert with these courts, with these judges, and the deep state, these embeds that are trying to take over this country. I believe they are a big part of this whole group that's trying to, impeach Trump. I mean, it's just a full-scale attack. This is what I see.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, since this event occurred, there are like a dozen major gun measures that are in the House and the Senate, the Congress, and in the Senate of the United States government, U.S. government in Washington, D.C. These things, you know darn good and well, a lot of these bills were drafted beforehand. So the bottom line is this is a full court press, in my mind, to make the gun issue an issue where they say we've got to do this because this kind of thing is just going to happen over and over again if we don't take away the guns. And, you know, it's so obvious to me that that's what it's all about. Brad, I want you to stay on this, and we're going to go over a little bit on the time on this, but this has been a great discussion. I want you to stay on this call, if you will, and I want to bring Bob Barnett into this as a former infantry officer to talk about fire control and how, you know, we need to create this kind of massive carnage. It would require much more than a single gunman with a bump stock on a semi-automatic weapon. And Bob, will you come in and tell us, give us a little of your background, and then talk about what you see here.
Dan, this is Bob. First, a disclaimer. My knowledge base, principal knowledge base, is now 45 years old. And, of course, current weapons are different and all that. But in our discussion, what I was discussing was I was trained in infantry and schooled in infantry, and this kind of a carnage is hard to even create in a army-on-army battle. If you look at killed and wounded in military battles, 50 and 500 is an enormously large amount. That typically would involve numerous weapons from multi-directional angles with interlocking fire zones and everything else. So all I was telling Dan is, given that, I'm having trouble believing, and I'm not speaking as an expert, but I'm having trouble believing that this one guy with a bump stock could maintain automatic fire on that large a field of fire for that period of time, putting out that number of rounds that have been claimed to do enough. Now, these are packed in people, and yes, it's like shooting into a herd. And in terms of action and response, that people are running around, all that, it's crowded enough that, and they're not armed, so the guy's not dealing with return fire. But it's awful hard to kill and maim that many people in that period of time. One guy with some bump stock deal and some backup weapons lined up. It just doesn't make sense if you use just common sense.
Well, Bob, we talked about we talked about this, but when you hear about these police shootings where, you know, let's say a bank robber or a group of bank robbers exit a building and you've got a bunch of police officers there and there's some kind of a shootout, about 90% of the time those police officers miss, and they're extremely well trained, but because of the I guess the excitement and the level of intensity and everything else, you know, their accuracy is not that good. Now, we're to believe that a lone gunman with a bump stock. And incidentally, when you're firing full automatic with anything, I don't care if it's got rubber bands on it or whatever, you don't have much accuracy. You and I both know that. I served in the Army myself. I'm not a combat veteran or anything like that, but I have also used M16s, and even anything beyond a 3-round burst, you start really losing the accuracy, and that's why they changed the design to be 3-round bursts. And so we're talking a guy that's running. I'm sorry?
When the M16 came on board, and we went from the M14 to the M16, and the M14 is much harder to control than the M16, but still on full automatic, what happens is because of lack of fire control, the Army reconfigured the M16 to a 3-round burst limitation.
Right.
Because in a battle, soldiers were emptying the magazine and throwing them wild. So,
and they do. It tends to walk. It tends to go up. It doesn't travel from left to right. When you shoot full automatic with an M16, it elevates the barrel, and that's just the natural reaction of that barrel.
Well, and a whole lot of rounds per kill or maiming is more accurate than a few rounds and a lot of killing and maiming. Not like you see in the movies. Right.
Well,
the one machine gunner takes out a whole company, and just that's not reality.
Well, and we're talking here, we're talking 500 people that were wounded or close to it, and 58 people that were killed, and virtually all of them that were willing to say something said the fire was coming from different directions, and I think it's proven by, the testimony here, just what Brand has to say that came from people that were there, that were at the site.
Well, the multi-directional thing would match, would more likely match fields of fire from different directions, different angles, more in an ambush setting than a single source. Right.
And that would result in this kind of carnage, or at least it's a lot more likely. And we need to. I read, and Brand, you can tell me if this is fairly accurate, but from the room that this gentleman supposedly did the single gunman theory, it was 300 and I've read 390 yards to where that concert was. Well, let's just assume they're off by 100 yards, and it's only 290 yards. That's a pretty decent shot for someone that's actually got a scope and trying to make an accurate shot. What was the distance that event was from the Mandalay Bay?
Well, from the hotel itself to the edge of the concert was 1,100 feet. So you're looking at right close to 300 yards. To the outside edge of the concert, you're looking at like 400 yards.
Okay.
Well, having been there, Brent, my question to you would be, what size was the actual field of fire you witnessed? In other words, was it pockets 40 and 50 yards away from each other? Was it centered? Was it moved in a planned direction, or was it just everywhere?
Okay, now I was not there. Let's make that clear. My nephew.
You mentioned your nephew and
yeah.
But you know the area, and that's
yes,
I guess
know,
that's what we're looking at.
I know the area, and I'm going to guess it's something like 200 by 300 yards. Okay, it's a fairly large area. There was 20,000+ people there, so that gives you an idea. And there was, from what I understand, there was casualties all over it, or people shot all over it. The majority of the casualties of the people that were actually shot and killed were in front of Gate 5 and Gate 7, all right, which would be on the east end of the concert area. Now, that is like 400 yards away, if that helps you any. But there was casualties everywhere. There's, we have a video which I have looked at repeatedly, and I have come to the conclusion that there was somebody dressed up in a security uniform or a Metro uniform. I've looked at that video over and over. I really believe that he shot into the crowd. I look at the before pictures, after he shoots, and after when he leaves, the way he reacted. It looks to me like he's got I would guess something like an AR-15 platform, but with a short stock. He obviously takes a knee. He brings it up just like shooting. Now, it looks like the muzzle flash takes place. Some people are saying it's a flashlight. I know you can connect a flashlight to the barrels of those things, but whatever happens, he takes off immediately. He gets out of there. All right. So, and I say this because I've heard over and over and over again from these witnesses that there were shooters in the crowd. There were shooters in the crowd, and of course that leads to total chaos. People don't know what the heck they're going to do, but so that's why you have you've got all these shooting victims that are really kind of all over that whole area, but the majority of them were in front of Gate 7 and Gate 5.
Okay, and you said it was 1,100 feet from the hotel to the near edge of that event, and that event was how many feet from the near edge to the far edge of that event? How far would that be?
You can throw on probably another couple hundred yards. So
okay.
Now that would be you're looking at like 500 yards to the far edge.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, Brand, you're almost at 400 yards with the 1,100 feet, because 1,200 feet is 400 yards, and so you're only 100 feet short of 400 yards on the near edge, and then you've got to go 200 yards beyond that. So this just absolutely flies in the face of any realistic ideas of a guy with a bump stack on the 35th floor, 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay being able to create that kind of accurate carnage.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I hate to do this because, boy, this has been a good show. And I would love to continue this conversation. Brand, might you be available for another discussion on this in a few weeks?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to plan on that because maybe by then, too, we'll have some other evidence and some other folks that are willing to come and talk. You've always been extremely easy to talk to, very articulate, very intelligent, and I really appreciate you being a guest on our show. And all I can say is that God bless you for your dedication to the cause of liberty. Let's just ask our listeners to pray for your safety, because people that do that have a tendency to have a few problems in the deep state.
Yes, they do, and I appreciate all the help I can get. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Bob, thank you for your input on this fire zone thing, because in reality, it makes no sense that one man could cause that kind of carnage by himself. And I really appreciate it. I know that you are not an expert in this sort of thing, but you are a trained infantry officer, and so even though maybe some of those, let's say, techniques are a little bit dated, they haven't changed that much. That crossfire and fire zones is something that haven't changed that much. And so your input was very valuable. With that, I thank our listeners for joining us for another show in Connecting the Dots, and ask that you join us again next week for another program where we will help our listeners to please connect the dots. And with that, I turn the show back over to you, Kelby, and thank you again. Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.